The earliest picture I have of Mary Pinchot was when she was a young girl and going with her parents and her glamorous older half-sister who was making the newspaper because she was becoming a famous actress. And they were going on a family trip to Bermuda, and they're all wearing their big winter coats, which just seems a little incongruous, but maybe it got cold on the boat going there. Somehow, she and her younger sister Toni were featured in an article in Vogue magazine as she was growing up. She was 15 years old in this picture. Picture on the left is of her in front of her parents who look like they're trying to keep up with her on a busy Manhattan street. And then as she was reaching young adulthood, somehow she got this picture taken, I don't know whether it was in a magazine, on a bicycle built for three. And she also had a glamorous picture of her taken, I think also for Vogue or one of the women's fashion magazines, that makes her look older than she actually was in this picture. I think she was just in her teens or early 20s. And this is a picture of her from the Vassar College yearbook. She went to Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I outlined the different train lines that she took in the early 1940s to go around. She liked to go to Yale to go to different dances that they had there, and down to Manhattan and over to Milford, Pennsylvania. And you could go directly from Poughkeepsie to New Haven. You didn't have to go down to New York and then back up on the New Haven line, back up to New Haven. There was a line that you could take to go through. And also, she went to a dance at Choate when she was still in prep school. She was at a girls' school, and they went to Choate, which was an all-boys school, for a dance. And she met JFK there. JFK had already graduated from Choate, but he had come back to go to this dance and to meet women. And he met Mary, and the story goes that she was with a date, but he kept tapping her date's shoulder to butt in and have the dance with Mary, which must have got pretty annoying to her date for that night. But they met each other, and he was taken with her beauty, and he singled her out at the dance. Talking about Mary's older half-sister, Rosamond, she was 16 years older, and she was tall. She was like 5'10", 5'11", and she, by happenstance, got into the acting business, sort of fell into it, but the press was quite taken with her, and they described her as the loveliest woman in America in the early 1920s. And there was even a book written about her, which I still have to read. But when I first saw the title of the book, I thought it said the loneliest woman in America, because she was on the lonely side. She got married, but it wasn't a happy marriage, and her husband was really abusive, and she had a couple of children, and she didn't really like the children. She told someone she didn't like her own kids, and they said, "Oh, how can that be? They're your children." And she said, "No, I really don't like them." But anyway, she tried to have a relationship with a director for a play, and he was kind of too busy to deal with her, and she felt a little rootless. She didn't really have anybody who she could come home to, and she was supposed to be the loveliest woman in America, but she was really not having a happy private life. So she decided to end it all when she was only 33 years old. She had a house out on Long Island, and she went into the car in the garage, and that's how she expired. So that was going on in the late 1930s while Mary was at Vassar, or maybe right before she went to Vassar. So everything wasn't super smooth. There was turbulence in Mary's family. So one of the things, when you look up Rosamond Pinchot, it mentions that she was a cousin of Edie Sedgwick. And Edie Sedgwick was one of the people that hung out at what was called the Factory with Andy Warhol in the 1960s. And he described people like Edie Sedgwick as quote-unquote damaged people. And they were related. Edie Sedgwick was the daughter of one of Rosamond's cousins. So they were first cousins once removed. But Edie Sedgwick, who seemed like she had a promising future as an actress, she was front and center in Andy Warhol's realm, but she got involved with drugs and everything, and she died of an accidental prescription drug overdose in her late 20s. Amos Pinchot, who was Mary's father, he was disconsolate over Rosamond's suicide, and a couple of years later, he took his own life, or he tried to, at his uncle's house in Connecticut. He slashed his wrist, and he didn't kill himself, but they put him in a sanatorium where he died a year and a half later in 1944. So soon after, Mary met and then quickly got married to Cord Meyer. Meyer, who was the same age as her, like a month younger, both born in 1920. And he was injured and nearly killed in World War II in Guam in the Pacific in July 1944. And he barely made it. He was in a foxhole, and a Japanese grenade came into the foxhole and blew up and killed his fellow soldier right next to him. And he was almost dead, and he couldn't see. He was totally blinded, and he wound up losing an eye and had to have a prosthetic eye. So all of this had to happen, recovering from that, having the surgery for that, all of that had to happen, all while he was meeting and being with Mary Pinchot, because they got married in April of 1945. So that was only a 9-month separation of time from when he was nearly killed in the Pacific. So things were happening quickly, and they sort of rushed into the marriage and got married in Mary's mother's Upper East Side apartment, and her father had passed away the previous year. Cord Meyer was viewed as a real catch, and he seemingly recovered well from his nearly fatal injuries, but he had gone to Yale, so he had the Purple Heart from the Marines, having been injured in battle, and he came from a wealthy family, and he was very well spoken, a good writer, and there was possibly talk about him being presidential material someday. Here he is speaking to various groups. He was anti-war before being in the military, and then having nearly been killed in the war, he was even more against war. And he had a twin brother who was killed in the war. So for all these reasons, he was really outspoken against war and really wanted to have some kind of world government that would prevent future wars. And he would even attract, with this thinking, the likes of Albert Einstein, who also believed we come up with some better solutions than fighting wars. Cord was very highly thought of. He was quite the speaker, and he really seemed like he had a future ahead of him. People were listening to him and following him. And this is their rather lengthy wedding announcement in the New York Times. One thing that caught my eye at the end was that Cord Meyer was a great-grandson of William Thaw of Pittsburgh. And that name Thaw rang a bell with me. It sounded familiar, so I had to look it up. And I discovered that it was a person named Harry Kendall Thaw, who would be like Cord Meyer's great uncle. And he became famous. He was totally nuts, but he became famous for shooting and killing Stanford White at a large dinner in New York City. And Stanford White was a famous architect with the firm McKim, Mead and White. And that firm actually designed the Amos Pinchot house at Gray Towers, the smaller house. So this was in 1906. So there was a little craziness in Cord Meyer's lineage, but it goes with all of us. There's somebody probably off somewhere in our family lines. One thing about Cord Meyer, I think he reminded Mary a lot of her dad. Her dad was very idealistic and also was very anti-war and also was a very good writer. They even appear to look somewhat similar, and they both went to Yale. So I just thought that was an interesting comparison, why people choose who they marry. So after Cord and Mary got married, he had a conference he had to go to in San Francisco, which was about the topic that he was interested in, like a world federation that would guarantee peace. And it wound up being a conference that is where the United Nations came out of. The conference was actually called the United Nations Conference on International Organization. And he spoke at that, and it was a big thing. And just coincidentally, JFK was also there. He went there to cover the conference as a reporter, and he knew Mary, so they struck up conversation. They knew each other, and he asked if he could interview Cord for his reporting, and Cord Meyer said no. He couldn't be bothered, and JFK never forgot that. So when you're on the way up, you got to be careful, because if you're on the way down, people remember who you were. So they didn't hit it off at this conference. Then after the conference, Mary and Cord, to have a regular honeymoon, they went to Montana, and they stayed at a ranch that was owned by his family. And then back then they took the trains everywhere, and they took the train back from Montana to New York. And on the way, on the train, Cord had written an article for some publication, and had written it twice as long as it was supposed to be. So Mary was offering suggestions to Cord on how to shorten it, and he didn't like that at all. And he supposedly exploded in anger at her on the train. So here they are on their honeymoon, and he's already showing that he has a kind of a strong strong, I wouldn't say violent, but very strong temper. And it must have rattled her. And it was something that would come up frequently during their marriage, that he would really get upset and yell and everything. So it was not an easy marriage. So that's something that happens when people don't take long to know each other before they do get married. But this is what happened a lot after World War II. People wanted to get married and get on with their lives. In October of 1947, Cord Meyer's writing career was seemingly going well. He had an article printed in the Atlantic, and it was very highly thought of and recirculated. And he was very pro-peace, but he started to worry that the UN and the world peace organizations, they were being infiltrated by communists who were just trying to grab control, and he got disenchanted with the overall process. So he tried to get a writing career going and writing books. He was sort of put off by publishers in New York for whatever reason, and then he thought he would try to get a professorship, but that didn't work out either. And so then the CIA contacted him and offered him a career. Allen Dulles, who ultimately became the head of the CIA, and he decided he needed to have an income somehow, and the other things weren't working out for him, so he joined the CIA. So Mary and Cord moved down to Washington, D.C., and where they got a house was just a 4-minute drive away from the CIA's headquarters in Virginia. So they lived in McLean, Virginia, and then while they were there, JFK and Jackie moved into a mansion up the road from them, a huge mansion. So here was Jack Kennedy again in Mary's life. Just seemed to keep happening. So in McLean, they started a family. They had 3 sons. The first was born in November of 1945, which was only 7 months after they were married. So that's another reason that they probably felt like they had to rush into marriage. And their first son was Quentin, and then their next son was born in 1947, Michael, and then their youngest son, Mark, was born in 1950. Michael, the middle son, he was tragically killed in an accident crossing the road near their home, a fairly busy road. He was following his older brother, Quentin. They were coming from a friend's house, and Quentin got across the road, but Michael was hit by a car, and he died on the scene. And Mary actually could hear it from her house, so they lived fairly close to the road. They didn't live on the road, but on a road perpendicular. And she came and held her son, Michael, as he was dying in her arms. And then she actually had the wherewithal to console the driver of the car that hit her son. That was a very tragic event to happen. It happened a week before Christmas, too, so it was really a sad time of the year in 1956. So 1956 was a real interesting year in more ways than just the tragic passing of Mary's middle son towards the end of the year. For whatever reason, Mary and Tony's mom felt that the 2 daughters should have a European vacation, and she was willing to pay for them to go over to Europe and have some fun. So they went over, and the fathers took care of the kids while they were gone, and it turned out to be quite the vacation. So at one point in France, Tony met Ben Bradley, and he was already married, as was she, but they had a romantic relationship, and they decided to divorce their spouses to be together. So what an outcome of a vacation. And then Mary, on the same vacation, she met an Italian man who had his own sailing ship, and she went with him in the Mediterranean off the Amalfi coast and had a romantic fling with him. So what a trip. Anyways, so the next year, as crazy as that all sounded, Mary convinced Cord to go with her back to Europe, where they would then meet the Italian guy that she had had a fling with and sail on his boat together. And by this time, in 1957, the Italian guy had a young American college-aged woman on the boat. So Cord didn't really suspect anything. He probably wondered how Mary met this guy or what their connection was. So they all went sailing together. And then Cord had to come back to the U.S., but Mary decided to stay on, and she told Cord that she was going to meet her sister in France and then come home. home. So Cord came home, but what Mary did was she went back to the Italian guy, and they went on another sailing trip together. Very romantic. And I've used the picture here of Marcello Mastroianni and Anita Ekberg from the movie La Dolce Vita as a stand-in for what the Italian guy must have looked like. And Mary must have felt she was Anita Ekberg to this guy. So they cemented their relationship. This is the second year in a row that they've done this in the Mediterranean. So she came back and told Cord she wanted to, and this was after their middle son had died at the end of 1956. So in 1957, she came back and told Cord that she wanted to be with the Italian guy and that the Italian guy was going to come over to the U.S. and they were talking about moving out west, maybe to Montana, of all places. And Cord must have thought, gee, that's where we went on our honeymoon. That's where my family has a ranch. He's like being totally replaced. And he wasn't happy to hear all this. And it was not an easy divorce. Back then, people would go to Nevada and get their divorces there. So Mary went there and you had to wait a month or something and stay in Nevada. I don't know. But she and Cord went through with the divorce. And then the Italian guy backed out and said, nah, Montana's not really for me. I'm more at home here off the Amalfi Coast on my boat. So that relationship dissolved, but Mary and Cord had severed ties.